Hello, everybody. It's Michael Hollands once again for Sound of the Movies. Today, I have the pleasure to be joined by Oscar-winning film producer Dan Jinks. Dan has produced and executive produced films and TV series such as Nothing to Lose, American Beauty, The Bone Collector, Big Fish, Milk, The Forgotten, Down with Love, Pushing Daisies, Drew, and many more. On today's episode, we will focus on the 25th anniversary of American Beauty. It is my pleasure to welcome Dan Jinks.
Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you on my show. Thank you very much for taking the time out of your schedule. I really appreciate it.
It's hard to believe it's almost 25 years since American Beauty came out.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, can you believe it has been that long?
Crazy. Well, I will tell you, the movie came out in September, and we're recording this in April. And in April, April was the first time I saw the movie. I flew to London to see a cut and to work with Sam Mendes on in the editing room a bit. And uh, we our big hope at the time was that anybody would go see the movie. We had no we wanted to make sure it just wasn't lost in the shuffle, and uh, we were doing everything we could to make sure it was the best movie it could be.
Yeah, and you certainly succeeded. And it was very successful at the box office. I mean, the budget was relatively moderate. It wasn't a big budget film. And the profits was relatively high. I mean, it made like at least 350 million worldwide, if I remember correctly. At least.
Yeah, DreamWorks did very well on that movie.
Then let's go back in time just a little bit. And of course, you had previously produced Nothing to Lose, starring Tim Robbins. Did you form your partnership with Bruce Cohen right after Nothing to Lose? How did that come about?
So I had been working. I started my career initially right out of college. I worked in the theater in New York, and then I went to work for a film producer in New York when I was 24. And he moved me to LA. And then I went to work for another film producer soon after that. And it was while working for the other producer, a man named Martin Bregman, that I found a screenplay called Nothing to Lose. And I helped get it set up at a studio, which was Touchstone Pictures, a division of Disney that doesn't really exist anymore. And I ended up producing that movie with my boss, Martin Bregman. And around the time that was coming out, I had gotten a little bit of attention, and other producers started offering me jobs to work for them. And I had decided I was going to do the crazy thing of just going out on my own. So uh, somebody suggested getting a producing partner, and they said get somebody who compliments you. So I knew a guy named Bruce Cohen, and my background was much more on the creative end of things, working with writers and finding ideas and working on pitches and finding books and such. And his background, he had been an assistant director, so he was much more of a physical production guy. And I thought that would be a good partnership, and we joined up together. Initially, we worked out of his living room, and just a few months into our partnership, I found the script of American Beauty, and needless to say that as hard as we worked on it, and may be the hardest job I ever had. I'm also keenly aware that finding a screenplay that good was really a very lucky thing. I feel so fortunate that I was able to work with a script that was that good, because it was a pretty great script.
Yeah. And do you think that most of the film, or the greater part of the film that is known or has been known for 2.5 decades now, is based on the script as you read it, or did you actually have to work with the writer to tweak it a little in certain areas? Maybe some aspects weren't fit for the big screen. I know it can be tricky process to really get a project off the ground, and you have to fix certain things. How did it work out?
So there, in terms of the original screenplay that we bought and what was on the screen, an awful lot of it was exactly the same. I would say maybe 90% of it was exactly what Alan Ball initially wrote. There were a couple of key changes that were made before we started shooting, and then there were a few things that were lifted during the editing process. It's interesting. People who read the script, there was a sort of a framing device of these courtroom scenes that took place at the beginning and the end of the script that ironically I was actually in. Sam Mendes, the director, asked me to have a little cameo in there, and we always thought that those were necessary. And then during the editing process, it just wasn't working. And so sometimes people will say, "Oh, you changed the script." In my opinion, we never changed anything. We just got rid of some things that were there. Most significantly at that point were these courtroom scenes, and there were also the character of Lester Burnham, played by Kevin Spacey. There were a couple of sequences where in his dreams he was flying. So on our little budget, we shot what are called plate shots, and then we rigged Kevin Spacey up to wires, and we spent a bunch of money on these flying scenes that we ultimately decided the movie was better without. So those were the big changes that were made in post production.
I was just going to mention that because a couple of hours ago, I rewatched a 30-minute featurette of American Beauty, and
Oh,
and it also featured an interview with Kevin Spacey in the courtroom, and I was like, I don't think he did that interview for another picture. So obviously,
no.
scenes had been cut. So what were those courtroom scenes about? Was it about an upcoming divorce between Kevin and Annette's characters?
Well, what's weird is that Kevin Spacey would be in those scenes because the courtroom scenes were about the murder of his character, and his is a little bit of a spoiler, although this is not what actually ends up happening. But his daughter, the character of Jane, and the character of Ricky are implicated for his murder. So we shot these courtroom scenes on a Saturday because it was an actual working courtroom and you can't get in there on a weekday. So we shot on a Saturday in downtown LA, and my role was playing Thora Birch's lawyer. And so I had scenes with Thora and Annette Bening, who's sitting right behind us. And so I don't know why Kevin would have, unless he decided he wanted to do interviews on a day he wasn't shooting anything, but he certainly was not in the courtroom scenes because the scenes were about his murder. Um, uh, but anyway, that's what the scenes were. They showed up at the very beginning of the movie and at the very end of the movie, and then we actually saw the characters of Ricky and Jane in jail, and we all decided that we wanted to leave on a more happy, hopeful, just less dark place. So um, I for one am very happy that those scenes, and there was some discussion about putting some of those scenes on the DVD, and Sam Mendes said, and I think he was right. He goes, I don't want people 50 years from now looking at this and second guessing and saying, why didn't they do this? Why didn't they do that? Because I'm proud of the movie the way it is. Let it stand, and we don't need to have any of those extra scenes out there. So they're gone with the wind, including my great performance as the lawyer. I say kiddingly. I didn't have any lines.
How did you actually get DreamWorks involved? And once you were in touch with the writer and you and Bruce agreed you wanted to do the picture, you of course had to find a studio to get the project off the ground. So why do you think DreamWorks was the perfect partner for this?
Well, so it was a little bit more complicated than your question is implying. That was a period of time when uh, spec screenplays were how a lot of movies got made, and an agent would go out with a script and might send it to a dozen different producers, and then they will assign a studio. Quite often, they assign it to a producer who has a deal at a studio. We did not have a deal anywhere, but we had sold a couple of projects. I got the script because I was familiar with the work of Alan Ball, the screenwriter, and Alan's agent, a guy named Andrew Canava, was and still is a very good friend of mine. And the fact that Andrew was my friend and that I knew who Alan Ball was, he assigned me DreamWorks if we decided that we liked it, which we did. So we only had one possible place to take it to. I will tell you, I found out later on that DreamWorks was never a place that they were thinking of actually selling the script to. And so I brought it to a guy named Glenn Williamson, who was another good friend of mine who was an executive at DreamWorks. And he loved it, and he gave it to his boss, a guy named Bob Cooper. And Bob Cooper gave it ultimately to Steven Spielberg, who ran DreamWorks. And this took about a week. And eventually, at the end of the week, we got a call saying DreamWorks is interested in buying it. So I called the agent and said, "Hey, great news! DreamWorks wants to make an offer for the script." They didn't even want to accept the offer from DreamWorks. They said, we really want to go to a smaller place. This should be an indie movie. Alan doesn't want to go to a studio, Alan being Alan Ball, the writer. And I kind of begged them. I said, please let us have a meeting. This is very awkward for me. So ultimately, they let us have a meeting, and the meeting with Alan Ball went very, very well. But the kicker was, as we were walking out of the building, Steven Spielberg was walking out, and my producing partner knew Steven very well. He'd been an assistant director for him and introduced Steven to Alan Ball. And Steven went on and on about the script and how much he loved it. And that really gave an enormous amount of comfort to Alan, hearing directly from Steven Spielberg, who was and is the most important, impressive, talented guy in the entire business, and as well as the head of the studio. So that helped a lot with Alan's comfort level that maybe DreamWorks would be a good place to go.
In terms of Sam Mendes, based on what criteria did you actually hire Sam? Because this was his directorial debut in the world of films. So he was primarily known as a theater director back then. So how did that come about?
So I am a huge theater geek. I see a lot of theater. I follow theater very, very closely. And so I was very familiar with Sam Mendes. An interesting thing about American Beauty is that it was being made by DreamWorks, but it was being made by DreamWorks for a price. So the town sort of knew that we weren't going to go after any of the directors who cost, $8 or $10 million, because that the entire budget was going to be not much more than that. So it was sort of an open directing assignment, as you will, and we ended up meeting a lot of people, and every day we would get these lists of more directors who wanted to meet on it. Sam Mendes first got the script from his agent, who loved it. She arranged a meeting with Spielberg, and Spielberg was between movies at this point in time, so he was meeting with a lot of directors. So every day we would get calls, "Oh, Steven wants you to meet this person or that person about maybe doing American Beauty." And on one of these lists that we got, the name Sam Mendes popped up. Well, it jumped out to me because I was very familiar with his theater work. He had just opened his first big show in New York was a revival of the musical Cabaret, starring Alan Cumming and Natasha Richardson. So I flew to New York, as well as Glenn Williamson, the executive that I mentioned at DreamWorks, and we saw the show together. And we were so impressed by what Sam had done. It felt almost cinematic, this production, that we left and said we should fly this guy out and meet with him. By this point, we had met, I'm guessing, at least 20 different directors. And when you meet 20 different directors and then Sam Mendes walks in, even though he's never done a movie, he was so smart, so articulate, so sensitive about this material that he talked about the tone perfectly. He understood that there was a lot of humor, there was a lot of darkness, there's a lot of drama, and how to sort of walk that tightrope perfectly. And it was one of the most impressive meetings I've ever had with the director. So we then went to DreamWorks and said, "Hey, we want this guy." By the way, Sam came out for a couple of days, and we had several meetings with him, including with Alan Ball, the screenwriter, because Alan was our partner, and we didn't want to hire anybody that Alan was not comfortable with. And it helped that because Sam came from the theater. In the theater, the writer is always very, very involved, whereas sometimes in movies, a director doesn't want a writer around. Sam did not feel that way at all, and really welcomed Alan being part of the process, and that meant a lot to all of us, frankly. So we went to DreamWorks and said, "This is our guy." It then took 2 months to actually get him approved. I'm not sure where, but somebody at DreamWorks started saying, "Well, maybe we should get this huge director or that huge director," which is exactly what they said they didn't want to do initially. But we had to kind of wait a while, kind of keep Sam warm, and we really kept pushing and pushing and pushing for Sam. And eventually they said, "Okay, you can hire your guy." And fortunately, Sam was very patient, and it worked out great.
And of course, it's always a gamble, especially if you hire a first time director. And as I understand, a huge amount of theater directors try to break into the film industry, but they had a hard time coping with a different environment because shooting a film is a different beast than directing a play. With, of course, no, you get my point. No disrespect to the world of theater, but I've heard quite a few times that directors try to sink their teeth into the world of movies, and they decided to pack up and go home. So also kudos to Sam Mendes, and of course his career really skyrocketed from there.
I think Sam always knew he wanted a career similar to somebody like Mike Nichols. Mike Nichols was a huge, huge theater director that then became one of the top movie directors in the business. By the time he met with us about American Beauty, he had several friends who came from theater who had directed movies. He had gone visited them on the set. He had really watched their process. So he was, uh, about as prepared as he could be. That said, every once in a while, he would ask some question, and I would kind of look at him like, "Well, that's a silly question." And then I would say, "Oh, wait, you've never done a movie before." I'll tell you, it was much more rare than you would think, but of course, it still did happen because he had never actually done it before. But he had really done his homework, and it was clear that he really wanted to do movies. And it's interesting. It's now 25 years later, and he has had the career he's always wanted. He does great work in the theater, and he does great movies, and he bounces back and forth between both. And I mean, he's so talented and has such a claim that he can kind of do what he wants to do. But it's very much the career that he wanted from the beginning, which was to go back and forth between theater and movies.
Yeah, successfully. It's absolutely amazing. And you just mentioned that the studio considered hiring a different director before they ultimately hired Sam. So did you receive some pushback in other areas as far as the story was concerned? Maybe somebody voiced concern as far as the subject matter is concerned, or about marketability or something in that area.
So, yes, there was one significant note that the studio had about the script. The one thing I didn't mention earlier, uh, again, this is a spoiler if somebody hasn't seen the movie, but I'm assuming if they're listening to this podcast, they probably have. But in the movie, Lester Burnham, Kevin Spacey's character, decides he's not going to sleep with the cheerleader, Angela. And he kind of realizes that he's become a better person by not doing that. In the original screenplay, Lester Burnham did have sex with the cheerleader. And Alan's idea was when he dies a happy man because he had sex with her. When the note came down after the studio said we have no notes, that was a pretty big note. And Alan Ball went away and thought about it, and he said, "You know what? I really want Lester Burnham to die happy, but I think if we do it right, he can die happier because he realizes that he's a better human being now. And part of being a better human being is not sleeping with this teenage girl. And once Alan embraced that idea, he wrote it really beautifully. And that was really the only significant note that we got from the studio in terms of the script. That all of that said, there were several people at the studio who did not really believe in the movie. They were really pushing us very hard on the budget. We started the movie without enough shooting days, and we all knew we didn't have enough shooting days. And our great savior was Steven Spielberg, who saw the footage and saw what Sam was doing and said, "This is really good. You don't have enough time. I'm gonna pay for you to have more or approve you having more shooting days." And the movie would not be the movie if Steven Spielberg had not done that. That was we needed those a few extra days.
What I love about the film is that it contains a certain amount of scenes that leave room for interpretation, and especially the scene you just talked about with Mina Savari and Kevin Spacey, and he decides not to sleep with her. Why does he do that? I mean, she tells him basically that she's a virgin, which of course runs counter to her behavior.
Reputation. Yeah.
Yes, of course, because she was always very insecure, and she pretended to be somebody special. And of course she told Thora Bircher's character that she has had sex many times, and then there is a revelation that she has never had sex. So does Kevin Spacey's character kind of lose interest because she confided in him, or does he realize, maybe that's not the way to go, and I need to reconsider? So that's an interesting scene. Or also when Chris Cooper approaches Kevin Spacey's character and he tries to kiss him, and he is being rejected, and what does he feel in that moment? And ultimately we learn that he's the one who shot Lester Burnham. So, and
Yeah.
why did he do that? Did he kind of have homosexual thoughts which he always tried to repress? For instance, that's a very interesting point of view. I think.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, and I think that Alan Ball wrote something wanting the audience to play a role in having to think about characters and what they're going through emotionally.
Yeah, and to me, it's a very special movie, and I think one of the best of the 90s, and one of the best in general. And on top of that, it was nominated for 8 Academy Awards. He won 5, including Best Picture, Best Lead Actor Kevin Spacey, and Best Cinematography for Conrad Hall, Best Screenplay for Alan Ball, and of course
Sam
Sam.
Mendes.
And of course, I forgot Sam. Yeah, Best Director of course. And at what point during production did you feel that everything was kind of taking shape and you had all the ingredients for a very special film?
You know, I've been fortunate that I've been in the awards conversation with a few different movies. I have never been driven by awards. I feel like people who go into something saying, "I'm going to win an Oscar," are setting themselves up for failure. The only thing that I allowed myself to even really think was a possibility was that Alan Ball's script could win or at least be nominated for, because it just felt like such a good script, and the script had become a widely read script in Hollywood. People were, usually once something is sold, nobody wants to read it because it's not available. But it was such a good script that you'd go to a dinner party and people would say, "Oh, have you read the screenplay yet?" Because it was such a terrific piece of writing, that I thought maybe Alan's script had a chance. I did not think that I just didn't allow myself to imagine that we were really going to be seriously in the awards conversation. That didn't happen until once DreamWorks saw it, which was in July, and a couple of journalists saw it, but really not many people saw it until we had our premiere at the Toronto Film Festival in early September. And that it was a really the reception there was really quite lovely. But I said to my producing partner at the time, I said, look, there are probably 25 movies that all think they have a chance of winning Best Picture. We're one of those 25, and I wasn't going to allow any more than that. I didn't want to get my hopes up, but I also know you just that early on, nobody knows. Every year there are movies in September that people think, oh, that's going to be Best Picture, and then they're forgotten about by November.
Yes, that's an interesting and also important point because I think if somebody decided to get into this business in order to win awards, I think you may end up driving yourself crazy because it depends on so many factors as to why you end up being nominated or even win. I don't think that's healthy.
The only time awards I think should come into the mix is if when I first read the screenplay of Milk, which I produced several years later. The script was just very much still being developed, but it was clear there was the kind of role there that a guy, if the script was done right and we cast the right actor and the movie comes together, it felt like the kind of part that a guy could win an Oscar for. That said, a lot of things had to work out, which they did in that case, and we cast Sean Penn, and Sean was amazing and ended up winning. But people who say this movie's going to win this movie's going to win that, I think they look like idiots, and that virtually never happens when people go around saying things like that.
Yeah, it always depends, and of course I don't mean to dwell on that subject matter, but it's always interesting, and also when the film Southpaw was released, I don't know if you remember it, with Antoine Fuqua directed it, Jake Gyllenhaal starred, and many said, "Wow, Jake Gyllenhaal, he look at the transformation he made for this film.
Yeah.
He's a major Oscar contender. I'm sure he's gonna win." He wasn't even nominated, so that goes to show how tricky it can be.
One of my first friends in the business, a one woman named Janet Grillo, who was at the time married to the director David O. Russell. And she and I were talking on the phone when American Beauty was in post, and she was asking when we were coming out. And her then husband, David O. Russell, was making a movie called Three Kings. And she goes, oh, you guys are going to be in the same Oscar mix. Well, David O. Russell was already a very, very big director with a lot of acclaim around him. And I remember thinking, oh, she's just being nice. That's so sweet that she thinks we're going to be in the Oscar race, and Three Kings, which by the way is a great movie, which in my opinion should have been in the Oscar race, wasn't, and that we was just not something that I allowed myself to imagine.
And in terms of your role when it comes to pre-production, principal photography, and also post-production, how would you describe your involvement in the day-to-day operation? I know that some producers are very involved during pre-production, during post, and some of them not even necessarily visit the set for whatever reason. So where do you see your responsibility and the areas you really have to focus on?
So that's a good question. Because, well, not even because, this is just sort of how myself and Bruce Cohen work, is that we were on set all day, every day. It was interesting. Somehow we sort of thought, well, maybe we should sort of split our time between the office and the set so that we can work on our next projects, because we didn't have anything else in development, or not much in development. And we came to the set maybe at like 10 a.m. on day 3, and we were already way behind schedule. And we realized we needed to be there, and we never, unless we were, at DreamWorks fighting for more time, or doing something related to American Beauty, we were on set every minute of that shoot. Even if we were going till 3 in the morning, we were on set till 3 in the morning. And also during pre-production, post-production, the early part of post, Sam Mendes wanted to go back home to London, and he edited, and we flew over, as I was mentioning earlier, we flew over to see an early cut and to give him some thoughts, and with Alan Ball, by the way, came with us, which was also great. And I kind of felt like that trip, by the time we left London, we had a cut of the movie that we were all feeling was pretty close to working. Um, by the time we showed it to DreamWorks, they had almost no notes. They were pretty happy with what they saw.
In terms of the casting process, the film has a very good ensemble. Kevin Spacey, Annette Bening, Thora Birch, Chris Cooper, Mina Savari, Wes Bentley, and so on. Were certain parts maybe more difficult to cast, or maybe even Kevin Spacey's character, because he had already been an Academy Award winner for Best Supporting Actor for The Usual Suspects?
This sounds like a line people say, but our first choices were Kevin Spacey and Annette Bening, and uh, they were the first people we went to, and we were so happy they said yes with both of them. But I will tell you, especially with Annette, we had a couple of backup choices in case Kevin Spacey said no, but we did not have a good backup for the role of Carolyn Burnham that Annette Bening played. We had ideas, but we didn't like any of them. And ironically, in both cases, both Kevin Spacey and Annette Bening had committed to doing plays, and they were both people who come from the theater. And so we had to start shooting by a certain date. And when we fell behind, we shot over the holidays. We shot on New Year's Eve, which your crew does not like. We were doing 6-day weeks because we had to get them out to do the plays that they were committed to. But those are both pretty hard parts. I don't know that if any of the parts were easy to cast. We spent an awful long time before we landed on Chris Cooper, and mostly because the studio was wanting like a really big name, and he was not a big name yet. And we kind of resisted because that character becomes a much more important character than you realize initially, which is kind of great. And if there was a big star playing that role, the audience would have been tipped off. Well, this guy's going to become something. He's not just going to be the innocuous neighbor. Um, and Chris Cooper had a movie coming out called October Sky, and we saw the trailer, and we were kind of really impressed by him. And um, we met him, and it was in my the office that my producer and partner and I were sharing with. It was the two of us and Sam Mendes, and maybe our casting director Debbie Zane. And it was a rainy night, and he came into the office with that same look he had in the garage scene. Like he looked like a scared but also scary guy with all tons of sensitivity. And literally, he walked into the office and we said, "Well, that's our guy right there." And boy, do I feel lucky that we got him. He was Chris Cooper is just gives us stunning performance in the movie. But for the kids, we saw every actor between an actor and actress between 16 and 22 in Los Angeles. Many people that we saw went on to become big stars in that age range. But I'm very happy with the three that we ended up with.
Great casting. And the ending also displays very smart editing, because we don't know Chris Cooper shot him until the very last second, because you see Annette Bening in the car and she has the handgun, she puts it back
Yep.
in her bag, and then she approaches the front door. That was very good. And of course, when I saw it at first, the obvious choice at first was Annette's character.
Yep, that's all true. That's uh and all of that has been it was in the script from day one. Again, the one thing that was also in the script was that the two kids get implicated for the murder that they did not commit, and we decided, yeah, we don't really need all that. Um, but everything that's there was always there, and I think it's kind of fascinating when the reveal comes through that it's Chris Cooper.
Yeah. And I would like to talk about the music and the original score by Thomas Newman. He had also been nominated for the Academy Award. Sadly, he didn't win that year. Sadly, Tom has never won the Academy
I
Awards.
know. He's so talented.
That's borderline criminal. That that Tom has never won the Oscar. I'm still rooting for him because I love his music, and I think American Beauty is one of his best of the 90s. And he also should have been in contention for The Green Mile, which he wrote in the same year. But how did you discuss which composer was most appropriate for the picture?
I will really give credit to Sam Mendes. He did his homework and he came to us and said, "What do you think about Thomas Newman?" I said, "Well, yeah." And when we were doing, you always do a temp score before you score your film, and we used all Thomas Newman music, and like many filmmakers, we all fell in love with the temp score, and we thought, "Oh God, I hope he can actually top this," and indeed he did. Funny story that for the next several years, virtually every pilot, before they're actually, when pilots are made and they're shown initially, it's all temp music. Everybody used American Beauty for their temp score. It was just funny to see it again and again and again and again and again, and other people using that music. But Thomas Newman's music is really evocative. It really played an important role in the movie working as well as it did.
Yeah, and I think it features all of the most important ingredients of a Thomas Newman score. I mean, it's always difficult to describe somebody's work and how they or which areas they focus on, because Thomas is obviously a very versatile composer, but it features some of his isms as a composer, which he used prior to American Beauty, in which he, of course, has used later on. But it's simply it's very catchy. It's emotional. It does everything that a film score is supposed to do, and it doesn't sound like a, let's say, conventional or a traditional film score. I mean, let's look at the opening cue, for instance, or when Kevin Spacey is having the dream of Mena Savari being in the bathtub, and he opens the door, and that piece, it doesn't sound like an ordinary film score. So Thomas really also tends to come up with something that everybody else wouldn't do necessarily. Yeah.
I think you're absolutely right. By the way, our director of photography was a genius, one of the greats of all time, named Conrad Hall. Sam Mendes has such a visual sense, anyway, that you just mentioned. Maybe the one time in the entire shoot where I gave Sam a suggestion about where to put the camera, because these guys knew what they were doing. They did not need to hear from me. But when that shot of Mina Suvari, when it was, I looked at it in the monitor, it was vertical, and of course, bathtub, you want to see all of her, all of the thing. And I said, "What if you did it like this?" And he goes, "Oh shit, it's going to take another half an hour to light it, but you're right." And anyway, I always loved that shot because it was the only time that I actually gave a serious camera suggestion that luckily he liked and listened to.
Some of the roses were generated digitally later on, but how about the bathtub scene? Because those roses look pretty genuine to me.
Those were all real roses,
Yeah.
and poor Mina Savari was uh, not feeling well that night. So she was a trooper. I didn't find out till later on, and she said that she was actually felt like she was coming down something, and of course she was stuck in this bathtub for hours. There's just lighting it, putting those petals in place, etc. Took a long, long time. She was really, really a trooper.
How would you describe the key elements of this film and what the audience may take away from this? the key elements in terms of the story, the meaning behind certain scenes, the takeaway, the message of the film, in terms of life, in terms of life decisions and relationships.
I think one of the genius things about Alan Ball's screenplay is that it's really open to for interpretation. One of the remarkable things about it is that it really speaks to different generations and different ways, different cultures in different ways. When we made the movie, there were people at DreamWorks who thought this is only going to work in big cities. It's never going to work in the middle of the country. And then it actually played very well in the middle of the country. And they said, well, it's not going to work with a younger audience. And then eventually a younger audience saw it and fell in love with it. And they said, well, it's not going to work overseas. And we actually ended up doing about double the business overseas. And I remember going to the London premiere and somebody said, well, I understand why this is a hit here, but I'm shocked that people like it in America. That there's something very universal in some of those family dynamics of, the Kevin Spacey character feeling like he's in a rut in his job, and Annette Bening feeling like she's in a marriage where she's not happy, and Thora Birch's character not liking her parents, and there are so many different ways in for an audience, and the fact that Alan Ball wrote it in a way that there's so much drama, but there's also so much humor in it. And I think the humor makes some of the dark stuff much, much more palatable. And anyway, that's my take on it. But I like the idea that different people have different interpretations.
What's actually next for you, if I may ask?
I that's a very good question. I have several things in development, and I don't know what's going to go next. It'll be interesting to find out.
I know it can be really hard to get a project off the ground, and many people have like at least 10 projects in development. And so it's always interesting to see what people will come up with next.
I have several things in development, and none of them are quite real yet, but that could also change soon. We'll see.
Dan, I would like to thank you for taking so much time out of your schedule for me today. I really appreciate that. And I had a great time talking to you, and I hope you enjoyed the conversation as well.
I very much did. It was fun to talk to you, and I look forward to listening to this.
Great. Let's talk soon. Take care. Thank you.